Kia ora Taiao. My name is, of course, Scott Metcalfe, tōku ingoa. I'm from Wellington, and I'm mucking around here because I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. Hey, look, so this is Ruth Spearing, and look, this talk is totally off piece. So I woke up this morning, all in good time, blah blah, stuck out in Leaston, blah blah blah, and things didn't work out the way they should do. So my dearly beloved Liz is now finding somewhere to park a vehicle, which blah 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 blah. So here I am, and I'm going to start talking for a wee bit, and I was going to go through a particular way and say these are all the things we want to talk about. I was going to have a whole lot of nice slides up and all the rest of it. I'm not going to try to attempt that now, but what I was going to say is start with the title of my talk and then move on from there via Ruth and then back to where I am. Hopefully that'll give Liz a chance to sort of turn up as well, and that'll become evident when we go. You can't hear a word, can you? Is that a wee bit better? Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so the title of the talk is, actually I'm going to take my watch off so I don't kind of go under or over time. It's called Mucking and Muddling Through, and it was leadership for the non-leaders. But I'm kind of thinking rather than leadership for the non-leaders, I think it's called I call it something like, it's okay to be chaotic. I mean, you're going to be house surgeons soon if you're not already, those of you who have gone into medicine or who are now doing your clinical years and that, or even if you're training interns, you'll know what chaos is like. And in some ways my life's like that now, and I'm kind of realising it's probably okay. And that's why it's a pity Liz isn't here, because she's taught me that, but we'll get onto that a wee bit later. So being chaotic is probably the talk of this, rather than mucking and muddling through or whatever. So I'll talk a wee bit about that. I'd like to make special mention of a fellow board member on the New Zealand Medical Association, Ruth Spearing. It was Ruth who kind of, through various ways, encouraged me to think about standing. And I'm so glad she did, because it's been a real education. One thing about doing these kind of things is you probably get more out of it than you give to it in some ways, in ways you'd never really anticipate. So I think the NZMA is something you should all think about joining with and voting for or voting with. Your voices count, obviously, and I'd really encourage that. It's one thing to join up, it's another thing to vote. So do think about that quite seriously. I see the NZMA as the peak medical body in New Zealand, and it's the good representation. It's a great advocate for things that matter, and I'm talking about health equity and public health, and I'd really encourage you to sort of be involved with the NZMA in whatever ways you can. So Ruth's here, and I'm so pleased she is here for that reason, and yeah, we'll carry on. So I think probably at this stage I'll kind of talk a wee bit about myself. I'm a public health physician. I trained in Auckland back in the 80s and then did some Wellington hospitals. But it's a bit more profound than that. So I was raised in a Baptist manse, which is a weird thing. It's kind of, if you can imagine, a Baptist minister with lots of people coming and going in the manse, and only afterwards you worked out that these people having, were struggling, or they needed a roof over their heads for a few days, and this is what you did. And I didn't kind of realise that until sort of my adulthood, what was going on. But the other thing about being a Baptist is, have you heard of the 4 spiritual laws? As in, your role is to evangelise, and it was always on my mind that, how many people have you led to the Lord this week kind of thing, and it was quite a high hurdle. As a child, trying to work through this. So I always had that in the back of my mind as something that was important, but not really knowing what to do with it. Then I guess I hit med school, and med school was hard. Med school was hard yakka. I don't know if you're finding that or not. You're probably all breezing through because you're all clever, but I mean, it was hard yakka. And I had my head down, and you might recall a rather prominent debate a few years ago about the ex-Prime Minister John Key. He claimed that he didn't know what was going on or take sides during the Springbok tour era, and people didn't believe him. Well, he must have taken a side. He must have known what was going on. But actually, from my perspective, I know exactly what he was on about. I mean, I didn't have a clue what was going on. I knew that various medical students around the place were getting out there and donning crash helmets and doing that kind of stuff. I'd never really clue what was going on. So as politically naive as it comes, really. I was really head down, bum up, trying to struggle through medicine, basically, in medical school. So I guess that's where I've come from, and yeah, it's quite an odd kind of way to do things, really. My trainee intern year, I was very privileged to do my elective in Ruxall and Bihar with the BMMF. It's a small mission hospital. Donkeys were the way you got around in terms of taxis. It was really quite, when they said it was the Badlands and quite impoverished, as other Indian people you'd be talking to, I think they meant it. It taught me a few things. It taught me real poverty, but it taught me a couple of other things. It taught me about adaptation, the resilience of people and the kindness of people in ways that you wouldn't expect, some of the really kind things people did. But the other thing it taught me was, there is no such thing as a great white wana. I thought I was hot shot, basically, and I soon had the wind taken my sails. Oddly enough, table tennis. I thought I was quite good at table tennis. Oh yeah, I have a hit. Yeah, sure. Blah blah blah. And these all the local nurses there were there, and they screamed me. And once I combined that with the huge innovation that I saw there, how people got through more than a number 8 wire, I suddenly thought, oh, there's something here that I'm missing. That maybe there's a big world out there of huge intellectual capacity and capability that we've got no idea of. We think this is the way of doing things, that we know how to do things. So it was kind of interesting for me. That was a big learning, aside from all the tropical diseases you come across and the abject horror and abject poverty and all the rest of it. It kind of was quite a positive thing. So I think at this stage, I could probably talk a wee bit about inspirations. Lesson 1, have people who inspire you. So I can go through a few people who've, I guess, inspired me and do inspire me still. So, first of all, I forgot to do this. How many people here are on the exec of the NZMSA? Okay, that's good. So, and how many people here are on other kind of quasi-political things? Yeah, sure, okay. So how many of you, so basically I'm actually talking to the people who are not on the exec or who aren't in quasi-political things. It's my message is more for, I guess, being a follower, what that might mean and how you can contribute. So, I take it you all know about Generation Zero. Well, they're my first inspiration. This is a group of young people who basically have a vast membership and a staff of pretty much zero. Voluntary time, well organised, and from memory, I don't think they have a huge amount of money, but people put time in, and it's organised in ways which are really clever. And they inspire me in ways of how they do things and how they go about things. Another person who inspires me is my daughter Lydia, actually. Just looking at her place yesterday, and all the plants and things she's got around in ways that I wouldn't expect. And it's wonderful when you see your own kids doing things in ways that, shit, did I produce that? It's quite nice. So you can get an inspiration from things that you don't expect. I mean, that's Lydia. I've got two boys as well. One's an adventurer who just drives me, not insane, but drives me to better things. And the other one's a real tinkerer who comes up with real lateral thoughts. So that's Sam and Mark. And I think this is a good stage here to think about if you are in a position to get a partner in life, and not everybody's in that position, and some people I know will be heartbroken today, probably statistically. But I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't want to be rude. But I mean, so I'm not wanting to kind of open up old wounds. But if you can get somebody who inspires you, it makes a big difference. So Liz is going to put her hands up now. Liz is always late. Liz will be late for her own funeral, but that's okay, because that's probably the reason she's late is because we had a bit of a vehicle issue today, and so she's been very kindly finding a car park while I've been able to talk to you here. So thanks, Liz. But get somebody who inspires you as well. So Liz is the reason probably I'm here in terms of, and not just kind of fiddling around at my desk doing lots of fun epi and keeping my head down. So what that means is, have somebody who can inspire you, who's politically strategic or has a strategic brain or can do things that actually make you grow. And I think that's very important if you can. Have somebody who makes you grow and who inspires you. So thanks, Liz. So my medical career has been littered by inspiring people, and they're not necessarily great clinicians, although they are good people. And some of the best clinicians I've worked with have been quiet people who get on with the job and are kind and are competent, but who kind of lead in a quiet fashion. People often think of leaders as extroverts, and at the end of this I'm going to scurry away into a rabbit hole and kind of soothe myself reading a book or something, because I find it hard talking in big crowds and that's okay. And so I guess it's that quiet type. But other people who've inspired me were the medical students back in the 80s. The other thing I didn't say about was, and because this is being recorded, I'm not going to say too much about it, but I was there during the 80s when medical students were, undertaking various procedures, not necessarily with patient consent, at National Women's Hospital, and I was with a raft of other medical students, and I just didn't know what was going on and didn't have the wit to say, hey, this is wrong. Some of my colleagues did say, hey, we don't think that's right, and they got kind of jumped on by some of the senior docs. This was before all the Cartwright stuff came out. Julia Carr and Don Matheson at Wellington, I'm not sure the full story, but along the lines of they kicked up a stink, organised a letter and pretty much discouraged or stopped that practice at Wellington Hospital. So these were people who went and basically, doesn't matter if you're medical students, you can still have a voice and actually make a change because you're right, okay? Don't think you're wrong just because you're not at the right place in the hierarchy. The Young Turks, so this was a wee bit around about the same time in the 80s, where it was Julian Crane, Neil Pearce, Carl Burgess, Richard Beasley. They stuck up a fuss about phenotyrol, which was an asthma drug, a very short, very fast-acting beta agonist, which was being associated with excess cardiac mortality for whatever reason. They pointed out the epidemiological associations, and they got jumped on. They got jumped on by a number of people, including the thing, gosh, who are you? You're just juniors. How dare you say this? I mean, they were vindicated in time, but again, it was that kind of what they stuck to their guns. Rod Jackson was the fifth one. You might know Rod as well. He was the fifth of the quartet, basically. He was a bit quieter, but, stuck to their guns, and I think it's very important. And that's one thing that it kind of... Okay, an inkling that this is something you can do. Certainly working at PHARMAC has been an interesting life experience. I've been there for some time now. I started off just as a contractor, worked my way from an epidemiology path and health economics to sort of a titular role now. Really, it's kind of very much deputising, which means you're there supporting the leaders, and that's all good. But again, it's been a situation where lots of contention, like Herceptin, for example, which was highly contentious around the evidence, which was quite hard work. Herceptin, that's trastuzumab for early HER2 breast cancers, how it's licensed at the moment in New Zealand. There were all sorts of issues around the price and the sequencing and the duration, and somehow all those arguments got kind of shaken up and into a bit of a mess, really. But eventually we decided, hey, the evidence is so murky, it's probably worthwhile trying to clarify that, so might as well write a commentary for the Lancet. Lesson number 2, when you submit your commentaries to the Lancet and they're accepted within an hour, think again, wonder if there's something funny going on. And sure enough, I said, oh, that's very fast, the Lancet, they accept a commentary uninvited within an hour, that's very good. So I said, oh, thank you very much for this. Is this what you meant? No, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. It was a reject button. So I thought, oh, that was good. But what I got out of it was a name. So all of a sudden I had a name that I could liaise with and say, oh, okay, that's very interesting. Well, what made you think about that? Da, 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 da. And it was a group of a few of us writing about this. And so eventually it went on, and I looked up the stats, and sure enough, the Lancet has a sort of a 98% rejection rate. But you looked at the odds, and actually they had something like a 50% success rate on appeals. And I thought, oh, people don't appeal. So I thought, oh, we appealed and made a fuss and said, oh, why? And they came back and got lots of wise words as to why the commentary was wrong. And so we wrote back and said, yes, but... And it soon became evident that there were probably other players involved. And to cut a long story short, we published, and probably the most powerful part of it was actually not so much what we said, but the supporters we had saying it. So there was others, particularly from the United Kingdom, and evidologists were saying, look, publication bias is a problem. What we were talking about was intra-trial publication bias. So most people think of inter-trial publication bias, where negative results don't get out in the public arena. This was a particular set of two RCTs where 1,000 women's basically results were not being published because they were negative results. The positive results, which were for concurrent treatment, were published, but the sequential results, the negative results, weren't. And we were saying, look, this is a problem. 999 or whatever the number was, women have given of their time and of their bodies basically for science. It's not being published. This needs to be talked about. And that was our main thing. And as it turned out with Herceptin, there was a court case on an unrelated issue. Eventually it was reconsulted on, and the government, the incoming government, made a promise to fund it. So it went through on a quite a different course, but that's all fine. So some of my other inspirers have been people like Clint McPherson and Ian Chalmers. Ian Chalmers was setting up the Cochrane collaboration, or did that. Clint McPherson's a grumpy, I guess, well, not a grumpy, a sort of quite a vocal epidemiologist who spoke out against the Iraqi war about the need to count civilian deaths and organised a petition on that. And what inspires me there is these people stand up and kind of talk about things. It's a phrase that's called talking the walk. So it's good to walk the walk, but sometimes to talk the walk. And that's something that it's taken me a bit of time to get through. So with Ora Taiao, essentially that started off with an idea, well, actually started off with the Al Gore film. So Liz took me and the family, we dutifully went along to this movie and looked at it and thought, oh crikey, there is a problem with climate change. Okay. Eventually Liz encouraged me to, write a submission. There were various submissions on, I can't even remember what the legislation was at the time. Might have been the setting of New Zealand's targets. So I had friends around who were doing the same thing, and we said, well, we might as well do some combined submissions. I'd never done a submission before. You kind of write it out and hope it works out, and all of a sudden I was doing submissions to government on something on climate change, nothing to do with health. And then that kind of, I guess, expanded to, well, we might as well put something in the New Zealand Medical Journal because they might take it. So basically copy-paste, change a few words, make it into a viewpoint article, get a few authors to sign up. Authorship, co-authorship, lesson number X, whatever, is a good idea because it exposes you to our diversity of ideas. She's actually a dear friend, and she was quite insistent that we not have a statement saying that doctors led the forefront of fixing cholera in London, getting the rates down back in 19th century London. Her point, which is quite right, and it seems to be evidence, was exactly the engineers who got the sanitation going, and the physicians were there pushing for it, but we were undercounting that. And she wasn't going to sign up if we had that. So, we came up with a solution around that. So stick to your guns, and sometimes it means that people have to stick to their guns with you. So again, we sent it out for review. Well, we actually sent it to the NZMJ. It was a bit of a half cut, was more kind of proof of concept, and they did their thing, and then we got this very good reviewer comment saying, this is all good stuff, but it seems a bit amateur. What's going on? And we soon quickly worked out that no, the review had been sent an early draft, not the most recent draft we actually submitted, the formal one. So we were missing out on deadlines, we missed out about a month. So Liz said, well, why don't you just get some supporters to join up to it? So we worked out all the friends we knew, all our contacts. In the end, the Viewpoint article had about 100 people, organisations signing up. And what it meant was the Herald picked it up and said, oh, here's a problem. So all of a sudden it had a bit more prominence as a result of errors. So errors aren't the end of the world. You can sometimes, work through with those. And that was basically the beginning of Taiao in a long way. If you can imagine setting up an organisation with a constitution and setting up teleconferences and that getting people upset and people saying you better get yourself a Gmail account and watch your back, and all of a sudden really realising that this is fairly serious stuff, having to tell my bosses who tell their bosses what's going on, because I didn't realise this was politically sensitive. I had no clue about this kind of stuff. Yeah, it was kind of interesting, and we were involved in a bit of a stunt. I didn't organise, I just thought, go along with it. But some of my colleagues, Rebecca Randerson and others, they thought, well, we could actually have a parliamentary protest. And have a big prescription and say, we need to do more climate action. And, oh gosh, why don't we put out a media release? Next thing I know is on the morning we were going down to Parliament, people were running around saying, the TV3 want to talk to us. Okay, I said, gee, I don't know, I suppose we do that. And then about 20 minutes to midday, we got pretty much summoned. I think it was 20 past, we got summons to a Minister of the Crown who basically took us into his office and had a little chat to us and found out a bit about us, how big we were, and tried to make the case as to why it was, that the government at the time was doing good work. And it was kind of a weird situation because I'd never been anywhere like that in Parliament. So these things can often give funny opportunities that you don't really think of. And Taiao kind of came up from that, really. Very, very much a case of just doing it and hoping you get it right. I was talking about this speech last night with Ruth, actually, saying, what have I done? Help. And she did remind me of a saying by G.K. Chesterton, if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And that's what that means is sometimes it's just a case of doing it, and if you have an error rate of 2%, the way to sort of be really productive is to raise your baseline. So if your error count is really high, but you're still maintaining a 2% error rate, that means you're doing lots of good work and lots of other good things. So that's one way of kind of looking at it. And kind of as part of this speech, I'm totally lost, and that's okay. The other thing you may find as you're getting older, you get quite blind. This is the bane of my life, and I'm trying to hold off on getting glasses, but these are $2 ones, by the way. And they're actually quite good, but yeah. So I guess there's the theme of being a good follower or being a good deputy, and leadership's not just leading from the front. Sometimes it's actually being a good follower and doing other work behind the scenes, and I think it has principles of being, working hard, being committed to what you're doing, sometimes taking your own initiative, feeling like an equal. So I think good organisations don't feel hierarchical, so it means that you have the back of your leaders, but you can also kind of talk with them, and you actually have a responsibility to pull them up. That's something I'm not very good at doing, I think. I think I could be better at that, actually. Having those hard conversations saying, hey, look, I don't know if this is right. And I find that quite hard, actually, and it's something that I need to keep working on, is actually being able to say, hey, this doesn't feel right. And that's why I was talking about people who inspire me, because I think what is happening is I'm just realising that people who do inspire me are that people who have that courage And I feel sometimes like the Lion and the Wizard of Oz, needing courage. And that's okay, we can work on that. But I think it's sometimes always being learning. That's another thing that I've learnt as I'm in my marriage, is basically you're forever learning, and I need encouragement. I'm what you would call a stale pale male in terms of getting older, telomeres are getting a bit shorter, a bit grumpier, and probably a proclivity to sort of settle down and do less, and that's probably not a good thing. So life is continuing learning, and try to sort of keep abreast like that way. Obviously, it's good to be committed to a higher purpose. You're certainly doing that in medicine, and I'm hoping you're able to do that within the NZMSA, and I think that's a really good thing. The ability to take risks and to speak up, admitting mistakes. This is not fantastically new stuff. It's all, if you Google it, you'll come up with the hits. That's pretty much those things. Oh, the other thing is to disagree internally, but have a common voice and support externally. There was a beautiful saying by Lyndon Barnes Johnson in 1971 when he was talking about actually J. Herbert, Edgar Hoover. Okay, I'm a bit nervous here. About Hoover, the FBI, the head of the FBI. Basically, sometimes it's better for him to be pissing. It's better if he's in the tent pissing out rather than outside the tent pissing in. So that's another way of saying, make at some stage you're going to have to make a decision as to where you're going to be. Are you going to be working within the system and trying to make it there, or what stage are you going to have to kind of be outside and be not a disruptive influence, but kind of trying to push the whole tent, I guess, which is what you're doing when you're pissing at it. And that's always a judgment call. And I'm certainly working as a public servant, which means that I have to be... It means you can't say as much as what you'd like to do, and certainly my role is to undertake government policy. So there are some topics that I won't even talk about, and that's appropriate, My role is to, as a public servant, is to do what the government directs, and that kind of makes sense. But that's not to say you can't be involved with other organisations who can say those kind of things. So again, think that through. And look, I think at this stage I'm feeling a bit tired, and maybe Ruth, if you want to have a couple of words, and then just we'll throw it open to the audience so that we can finish in good time. How does that sound? Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Well, the first thing I would like to say is that Scott has totally made himself sound as though he's not the person he is. Scott is one of the most valuable members of the New Zealand Medical Association executive. He does the most amazing literature searches on every single topic that we're asked to comment on. He is a really wise voice. So this is somebody who I have a huge, huge respect for. And although I have never met Liz before, they are a real powerful force in medicine and social change here in this country. So thank you, Scott. I am the classical non-leader. I was a third kid, and my brother and sister were both very bright, got scholarships to Cambridge, UK, and I wasn't ever going to go to university because I actually wasn't bright enough. I had dyslexia, and so I decided I would go and do VSA, and did a year in New Guinea, and that's when I decided I would do medicine. And long story short, I think it was there that I actually started to realise that you actually can make a difference to things by just standing up for things you believe in. I came from a family where that saying, it's worth doing a job even if you do it badly than not at all. And that is so true. There can be many, many times when you go, oh, I could have done better at that. But doing it at all is the most important thing. There are going to be times when you're a leader when you will get people against you, but you can block that out. People say to me, because I have challenged people at a fairly high level, We were going to have the UK model of private-public partnership for the rebuild of the hospital here in Christchurch. That would have been a total disaster. The Treasury in the UK actually reported in one of their official investigations that was probably the worst thing that ever happened to the National Health Service in the UK. And yet here, as so often in New Zealand, we were copying the mistakes, the known mistakes. And so in my role of chair of senior medical staff, we put out an opinion piece. It always has to go under one name, because I was chair, it went under my name. And that was probably the first time that I actually realised that, yes, you could actually change what is a major government policy. They'd actually employed somebody already to actually try to develop the model here in Canterbury. I certainly was influenced by the leaders of the mid-1990s. There was a competitive model of health by the national government in those days. And our local leaders across the country in health, but particularly here in Canterbury, so Phil Bagshaw, Sid Gowland, they stood up in a major way. They published the booklet that was about 5 deaths which were directly as a result of the cost cutting in the health service. Very brave thing, because many of them were involved actually in the deaths of those patients. They were systems problems which led to the stent inquiry, and the stent inquiry then led to the dropping of the competitive model of health. And all of us should be really grateful to those guys of the 1990s. And I guess it was they that inspired me to do some of the things that we've managed to do. I won't go on more because I want to open it up. But if you believe what is right, and just remember your base values, remember integrity, remember taking responsibility for your actions, then even if people try to attack you, you know that you'll be okay.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, any questions? Yeah, sure.
Perhaps a side note, but regarding PHARMAC and the decisions and the confidentiality around that, how much is allowed in public discussions, which is something that's interests a lot of us in theory, but we have no clue what we're talking about, at least myself, when we talk about pricing of drugs and things like that.
I'd probably be fair to say that there's nothing stopping that in terms of, anecdote time. Back in the mid-2000s, about a decade ago, the New Zealand Medical Journal had a very good special series on PHARMAC and how PHARMAC could do better with things. And so it was about 20 articles, and each article took an issue. It might have been, the use of short-acting beta agonists, or it might have been the use of gemcitabine or temozolomide in certain brain cancers at the time. So there was a whole lot of funding issues at the time, and clinicians would write in and say what they saw as the issues and things. Harvey White did some quite good stuff on statins, for example. Quite long, well-researched articles, and I've got a lot of time for Harvey for that kind of rigour. He's very, very good. And we had the opportunity to respond, which we did. So what that brought out was, I guess, a demand for information and a need for information and a want for information, and we could give it. And a lot of it was not so much on the clinical evidence or efficacy, it came down to cost effectiveness. And that was the kind of thing which is always a bit tricky, because prices are often confidential. And so what you want, whatever you do, you can't actually have it so it can be you can reverse engineer the price, because they are confidential to the companies, and that's the way the companies want it. So we respect that. So that's a longer way of saying, yes, we do when we can, and it's probably a good reminder to me just to sort of kind of get the message out on things. I mean, we had a bit of talk around pembrolizumab for the melanoma drugs at the time, when PHARMAC at that stage was unable to fund it. I mean, things have moved on since then. And I remember veculizumab for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria was another one, high health need, dreadful condition, and just at that stage, PHARMAC's view was we see this need is important. Unfortunately, there's just the price being offered was too high at that time. So we do try to do that, but I mean, I take your point. I think we would, I think there is room for more, I guess within what we can do with that price constraint. You want? No, I'm just joking. Yeah.
Son of a haematologist.
Sorry? Oh, right. Cool. Yeah, you could know all about veculizumab, yeah. Yeah. Hi. Yes.
As I'm GP, I spoke yesterday. I just wanted to add a comment about what Ruth was saying. And I think that if you are a leader, you are going to be in the firing line. I completely agree. And it's really important to have a raft of trusted people around you, and you'll find them in this room potentially, who are going to be your raft. So although in the face of it to the public you're dealing with this on your own, you have a group of people who quietly support you, and building your professional raft is a really important thing to do. And those of us who are in leadership positions are very much there, supported by a group of people, and then we also support them and have those quiet conversations off the grid, which allow you to remain standing.
That is so true. I think that is such an important point. That yes, here locally I've got a fantastic executive from the Senior Medical Staff Association, and likewise with the New Zealand Medical Association. We've been able to support Liz Berryman with her putting herself forward as chair, and also Maurice Stewart, who I don't know if you guys know, she was a trainee intern 3 years ago, and national chair of your association, and she underwent some horrible bullying, and she had us around her to support her, and I think that was so important for this time.
Yeah. So I think time's up, which is good. So I think what we can say is, whatever you do, make sure you get life from it. That's something that Liz tells me as well. So I mean, I'm pleased that you're in the NZMSA. I've got a lot of time. I've had a look at your website, for goodness sakes. You're doing good work. Keep at it, and you're doing the right thing by being in associations. So join associations. I mean, it's not necessarily the de rigueur of the time, but do that. Think of the NZ Medical Association as your part within the wider. You're my colleagues now, but you're going to be really my colleagues in a year or two's time, and it's inescapable. And I think, think about things like, in terms of climate change, join organisations like Generation0350.org or Ora, the New Zealand Climate and Health Council. And my final thing is just in terms of my whānau, I guess, is actually PHARMAC themselves are actually quite forward-thinking in terms of health equity, and also the legions of public health physicians who I am, they've dragged me away from my lassitude to really inspire me. I'm not going to say names because there's just too many, but do keep up your professional associations. So I'll leave it there.
And it is fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's actually seeing the difference you make, and actually suddenly realising that you have made a difference. You have overturned some policy that was so bad. When we heard Philippa talk yesterday about what she's done in housing, and it's like, wow, yes. So, yeah, get out there, do it, guys.